Imagine a war so massive, so devastating, that the winners end up so exhausted that they collapse shortly afterward. In fact, the Peloponnesian War has often been theorised to be the event that allowed for the rise of Macedon and its famous kings Philip and Alexander, because it left Greece in a pile of rubble. It was a war between two cultural opposites, one powered by democracy and naval innovation, versus a land-based military whose entire system revolved around discipline and authority. After defeating Persia earlier in the century, Athens and Sparta were supposedly allies. But you know how sometimes you're technically friends with someone, but deep down you know that if they had the chance to conquer you, they absolutely would. Well, that was probably the correct characterization of the relationship between Athens and Sparta. Athens built the Delian League, initially a defensive alliance against Persia. Sounds pretty wholesome, except Athens slowly turned it into a literal empire. Member cities paid them tribute, Athenian fleets enforced obedience, and those states who tried to leave the Delian League were persuaded, usually by triremes. Sparta, meanwhile, looked around and thought, well, Athens is looking pretty rich, and their navy is looking pretty big, and their walls are looking pretty thick, and they're collecting quite a lot of tribute. Should we be concerned about this? Well, yes, I think they should, and Thucydides, our resident historian on the war, says that the fear of Athenian growth was actually the true underlying cause for Sparta's invasion of Athens. The official start of the war comes from a dispute between Corinth and Corcyra, who were both allies of Athens and Sparta. And everyone takes sides, and about half of Greece is declared war on the other half. Pretty classic. King Archidamus II leads the Spartan forces, and Pericles, probably Athens' greatest statesman, insists that Athens avoid fighting the Spartans on land. That's pretty clever. Sparta are the best land force in Greece. So what was Pericles' strategy? Don't fight Sparta's hoplites on land, hide behind our thick walls, rely on our superior navy, and let our enemy exhaust themselves. And actually, that should work pretty well. Sparta marched into Attica every year and burned Athenian crops, but the Athenians just hung out behind their long walls. And they could still supply themselves because they were importing grain using their massive navy from overseas. The only problem was that in 430 BCE, a plague hit Athens, possibly typhoid, and about a third of the population of Athens died, including their amazing leader Pericles. Athens was now slightly screwed because they were led by men who were nowhere near his level. Democracy slowly swung to demagogues who promised quick victories. There was a particular one of them called Cleon, who was pretty loud, aggressive, and ambitious, and according to Thucydides, not exactly a genius. Athens, desperate and angry, started getting slightly reckless. Surprisingly, Athens actually got a huge win early on. In 425 BCE, an Athenian force fortified Pylos. The Spartan troops that had been stationed on the island of Sphacteria got trapped, and after a few skirmishes, Athens forced their surrender. And this was pretty shocking for the time, because Spartans didn't surrender. They weren't known for this. It was against their kind of military tradition. And the defeat just completely embarrassed Sparta and boosted Athenian morale. But with Pericles dead, the victory basically went straight to the Athenians' heads. The war could have ended here. Sparta offered peace, but the Athenians refused. Enter Brasidas, a Spartan commander who actually had pretty original ideas for a Spartan. Instead of continually throwing men against the walls of Athens, he decided, hey, let's have a shot at the Athenian allies in northern Greece. And actually, he used something really, really innovative for a Spartan. He used diplomacy, and actually managed to win over a bunch of city-states that used to be allies of Athens. So Athens sent Cleon north. And at the Battle of Amphipolis in 422 BCE, both Cleon and Brasidas are killed. The city of Amphipolis had surrendered to the Spartans shortly before the battles, and our favourite historian Thucydides was actually the Athenian general tasked with defending the city. But he wasn't in the city when he was meant to be defending it, and arrived too late to save it. So he went back to Athens to face trial and was actually exiled. But this is quite good for us because he spent his exile writing probably the most brilliant war history of antiquity. So Athens and Sparta decide to negotiate a peace after the battle. This was called the Peace of Nicias. It occurred in 421 BCE and supposedly was meant to be a 50-year peace treaty. It lasted about 6 years. Nicias really wanted this peace to hold, but the politics in Athens shifted constantly, and war-hungry politicians rise. Enter Alcibiades. Charismatic, brilliant, ambitious, and scandalous. Basically, the guy who's got great ideas but might burn down his own city by accident. He pushed Athens to expand, to conquer, and to go big. So Athens decided, hey, let's invade the city of Syracuse in Sicily. This was an enormous, distant city-state that was aligned with Sparta, and it is the biggest Athenian expedition that was ever launched offensively. Immediately, there's a bunch of stuff that happens. Alcibiades is accused of a religious scandal, so he was recalled to Athens, but he thought, hey, I don't really want to face trial, so he fled to Sparta and switched sides. And in Sicily, Nicias ended up in command, and the siege of Syracuse goes absolutely terribly for the Spartans. Syracuse received a Spartan advisor called Gylippus. The Athenians that were besieging the city got trapped. They were then defeated at sea and on land and were forced to retreat. Nicias and Demosthenes, who were prominent Athenian statesmen, were executed, and tens of thousands of Athenians were captured, many of them dying as slaves in quarries. So Athens had essentially lost its navy, its manpower, and its prestige. And who was the big winner here? Well, Persia, the old enemy of the Greeks. They were absolutely overjoyed seeing that Greece was destroying itself. Persia kind of thought, hey, well, wouldn't it be fun if I tinkered a bit with this situation and funded Sparta? So yeah, Persian money essentially built a new Spartan navy, and the Spartan commander Lysander trained its crews, hired its rowers, and systematically began breaking Athenian power at sea. Athens lost some key naval battles, including the Battle of Notium in 407 BCE, and later the absolutely devastating Battle of Aegospotami in 405 BCE, where Sparta destroyed almost the entire Athenian fleet. And this was really, really bad for Athens because it could no longer hide behind its walls and import grain, so Athens started to starve. And in 404 BCE, Athens surrendered. And democracy was briefly replaced by the pro-Spartan 30 tyrants. Sparta celebrated an amazing victory, but only for about 5 minutes, until it realised that it actually had to run Greece, which was pretty draining and exhausting. So who actually won this war? Technically Sparta were the victors, but in reality nobody in Greece won. Sparta became pretty weakened and were hated in Greece for the way that they were running the new system. Athens was completely shattered. And yeah, almost all the Greek city-states were completely drained. Only a few decades later, the Kingdom of Macedonia, under Philip II and later Alexander the Great, walked into Greece and kind of thought, hey, well, listen, guys, there's no superpower here anymore, so why don't we run the show for a little while? The Peloponnesian War left Greece just completely ripe for the conquest. Thucydides' message is clear. Wars driven by fear, rivalry, pride, and bad decision-making rarely produce winners. Athens lost its empire, Sparta lost its strength, and Greece lost its future. A war that destroyed a civilization and taught the world very little because humans seem absolutely amazing at repeating their old mistakes. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you on the next one.